Hello everyone, this is Andrew from Crown Academy of English. Today's English lesson is about must versus have to. So we're comparing must with have to. So let's look at two example sentences. I have to read these reports. I have to read these reports. And I must buy some eggs. Okay, I must buy some eggs. So these are the two structures that we're looking at today. So have to and must, they both express obligation. Okay, so the concept of obligation. Okay, so there is an obligation to read these reports, and also an obligation to buy some eggs. But there is a subtle difference. There is a small difference between the meaning of have to and must. And it is a different type of obligation. So the obligation of this is different to the obligation of this. So have to expresses objective obligation, and must expresses something that we call subjective obligation. So what does this mean? Well, watch this lesson to learn the difference. I'm going to explain each of these in more detail and explain the difference. So let's start with have to. And let's start with the form and the structure. So here is the form and the structure. We have the subject, then we have the verb have as a main verb and in the correct form. So subject with have in the correct form, followed by the infinitive of another verb. So remember, the infinitive is the word to followed by the base form of a verb. So we're going to look at some examples. So this is the present simple of have to. So remember, I said that we put have in the correct form. So we take have as a main verb and we put it in the correct form. And so the correct form here is in the present simple. I have to work. So to work, this is the infinitive. I have to work. You have to work. He or she has to work. We have to work. You have to work. They have to work. So notice the only one that changes is the third person singular. Okay? Past simple. So again, we put have in the correct form, and the past simple form of have is had in all of them, for all of subjects. So we say I had to work, you had to work, etc. for all of them. It's exactly the same for all of the subjects. And we're now going to look at the future simple. So can you guess what the form of this is? Well, here it is. I will have to work, you will have to work, he or she will have to work, and it's the same for all of them. Okay? So here we add the auxiliary verb will. Okay? To modify have. But it's the same for all of them. So this is the future. So the form is quite simple. You have the subject, then you put have in the correct form for the tense that you want to use, and then you use the infinitive, to followed by the base form of the verb. Okay? So if we had study here, we would say I had to study. I have to study. I will have to study. Okay? So that's the form. Now let's look at the meaning. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, have to expresses objective obligation. So what does this mean? It means that the obligation is external. The obligation comes from someone else, not you. The obligation is not internal. It comes from someone or something else. And it is often a law, a legal requirement, or a rule, or an instruction. Okay, so it's an obligation because someone else tells you to do something. Okay, it's an obligation from outside. So here is an example. Mark says, let's go to the beach on Saturday. And Jane says, no, I have to work. I have to work. So this is external. Jane has to work, and it is an obligation. It is an external obligation because the obligation comes from her company. Jane's company is forcing her to work. Or maybe not forcing. Forcing is a bit strong. Jane's company is asking her to work. Okay, so it's an external obligation. It's not Jane's decision. Jane would rather go to the beach, of course, but her company wants her to work. So she says, no, I have to work. And here is a very good example. In England, you have to drive on the left. You have to drive on the left. So this is simply a law or a rule. Okay, it's not the driver's decision really to drive on the left or the right. It's because it's the law in England and also the United Kingdom and other countries all over the world, in fact. Australia as well, they drive on the left. So in all of those countries, you have to drive on the left because it's the law, and the law is an external obligation. You have to wear a hard hat on a construction site. You have to wear a hard hat on a construction site. So this is the hard hat. And there is an obligation to wear this on a construction site. And again, this is the law. It is a law for health and safety reasons. Okay, you have to wear a hard hat on a construction site. There's no choice. You don't have a choice about it. It's an instruction. It's a law. It's an external obligation. Okay, so that's have to. Now let's look at must. Must is a modal verb, in fact. Have to is not a modal verb, but must, yes, must is what we call a modal verb. So let's look at the form and structure. Subject followed by must, followed by the base form of the verb. So this is not an infinitive. As you will see, we do not have the word to for this. Example. So here it is. I must study. You must study. He or she must study. We must study. You must study. And they must study. So it's the same for all of the subjects. So must is always the same form, and the base form of the verb is always the base form of the verb. That doesn't change. Okay? And there is only one form for this. Okay? We do not have a present, future, past. This is just the single one form. But we use this one form, we use it to represent the present, or the future. Okay, so there is a meaning. This has a present meaning or a future meaning. So here is the present, an example in the present. I must study for this exam. I must study for this exam. So we're talking about obligation in the present. I must study now, in fact, for this exam. And here is an example with the meaning of, with a future meaning. I must wash the car tomorrow. I must wash the car tomorrow. So it's exactly the same form. It is this form, but now we are talking about the future. And to make that clear, we have used the word tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow is obviously in the future. So it's, this is like a present form, I suppose. It's a present form. So the form is the present, but the meaning is the future. And we do not use must in the past. There's no meaning or use of must in the past. Okay? So let's now look at the meaning of must. Must expresses subjective obligation. So what does this mean? Well, must expresses personal obligation or internal obligation. Remember I said have to is external. Have to is external. It's a law or a rule from outside. Well, must is the opposite. Must, the obligation comes from you. It's internal. It's your choice. So it's not a real strict obligation, but it's an obligation that comes from you. Okay? So we often use must, in fact, to represent or to describe some sort of self-discipline. Okay? If you are very self-disciplined, then you will then we use this must. So it is an obligation imposed by the speaker. Okay, so no one is telling you to do something. Nobody else is ordering you to do something, but it is your choice. You make it an obligation because it is important. So Mark says, let's go to the beach on Saturday. And Jane says, no, I must study. No, I must study. Okay, so this is Jane who is deciding that studying is an obligation. Okay, nobody is ordering Jane to study. Nobody is telling her that that she must study. Okay, it's her decision. So Jane is forcing herself to study. So this means that Jane is in fact very motivated. She is very disciplined. Okay. Claire says, I must go to the pharmacy. I must go to the pharmacy. And it is Claire. Claire alone decides it is important to go. Okay? Nobody else has said, Claire, Claire, you must go to the pharmacy. No, it's internal. It's a personal motivation. Okay? She is being very disciplined. She makes the decision by herself. So as you see, it's not a real strict obligation, but we call it a personal obligation. Okay. Oops, sorry. Must not. The form is subject followed by must not followed by the base form of a verb. And the meaning of must not. Well, we use must not for something that is not allowed or not permitted. Okay, So something is prohibited, okay, which means not allowed or not permitted. Okay, so it's an instruction not to do something. And the meaning can be objective or subjective. So that means that the meaning can be an external obligation or an internal obligation. So let's look at an example of an external obligation. So this is why there was a big cross here. Visitors must not park in the staff car park. Okay, visitors must not park in the staff car park. So this could be on a sign, for example. This is an example of a sign that is in the car park. Visitors must not park in the staff car park. So this is objective because the obligation or the rule is external. Okay, it's external to the visitors. It's an instruction coming probably from a company. The company is saying you must not park in the staff car park, or visitors must not park in the staff car park. It's objective, it's a rule, and it's external. So this means parking in the staff car park is not allowed for the visitors. But the meaning can also be subjective. So we can also use this structure for a more subjective or internal obligation. So here is Claire, who is very tired today. And since she is tired, she says, I mustn't go to bed so late. So she is reminding herself, and she's saying, I mustn't go to bed so late. So this is the contracted form. This is very common. So this is the contracted form of must not. So we put an apostrophe here to represent the missing letter O. Okay, I mustn't go to bed so late. So again, this is not a real obligation. It is an internal or personal decision to change a habit, in fact, to change a habit. I mustn't go to bed so late. Okay, so this is obviously subjective. Nobody is instructing Claire to go to bed earlier, but it is a personal decision to go to bed earlier. Okay? So there we are. I hope you now understand the difference between must and have to. If you're preparing the IELTS exam, then click here for more information about our online course. And here are some other videos that I strongly recommend.